Welcome back. I'm Tom Van Ness, your host, your guide through grief. We're here in season 2. I know it's hard to believe um, that we were able to get into a season 2 and have some wonderful conversations with other guests and their grief journey. And today's episode is really no different. That they have their own story and experiences to share, but also professionally and just preparing your life. This guest is a person I'm really excited to have on today. Their family, they're really amazing at the job they do. And he's just brilliant. So I'm excited to have him on today. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Um, Guest, Hal.
Thank you for having me, Tommy. I'm Hal Oakley. I'm Tom's first cousin once removed. Grew up with his mom and all of our other cousins,
Mhm.
and then watched Tommy and his brothers from the very beginning. And very proud of everything that you're doing and have done with yourself and your family. So I'm pleased to be here. I'm a lawyer. I my most of my practice is estate planning and administration, and I also do business law. And so in this part of my career in particular, a lot of it's estate planning administration.
Mhm.
In my career, I've done a lot of corporate law as well.
Yeah. And Hal and I also went to one of the best colleges
No, the best, the
in the
best.
world, without question. Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. All our Blue Jays out there, thank you for supporting us, and thank you for being part of that wonderful uh, place of education. If it wasn't for out that, we wouldn't be here doing what we're doing today.
That's
So,
right.
um, Hal, you said it very much. We're going to get into why we have you here today and what we're going to talk about, but to help loosen up our hearts and our minds and our conversation, I have this red box here, and it's we're not really strangers. It's just kind of a nice question or thought provoking piece to
Okay.
kind of get you going. So, um, because we're trying to build connection with our viewers and with people in their grief journey, and also sharing yours, I like to try to build connection. So we're gonna pull one of two cards. I pulled out two from the connection level. Pick one, and then I believe you get to read it and then answer it.
Okay.
How you feel?
Okay. What question are you trying to answer most in your life right now? Okay. Well, in some ways, that's kind of easy. What's next?
Okay.
Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And if not, what more does God want from me?
Okay.
And so, and that's at a personal and a professional level. And, you know, just
Awesome.
always, I believe in being a lifelong learner and that we're never static
Hmm.
or we shouldn't be. And so that doesn't mean I stop doing certain things. It may mean I morph and do more things or in a different way.
Absolutely.
So there's my answer.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, you even got to do that a little bit after the family business sold a little bit. You went back to school
That's right.
to study more in depth into estate planning, right?
Right. Well, I went back to Washington University and got my master's of law in taxation.
Hmm.
So that's a great add-on for what I do in estate plan administration, and even my corporate practice as well. Going back and taking a deeper dive into a particular subject. It's not that I really love taxes, but
Yeah.
they're an important part of planning, and for whether it's a business or a personal matter planning. So selling the company, all of a sudden, a lot of people had more needs, and that was a part of my practice already that I cared about. And so I thought, hey, I could challenge myself to learn more about this and be better at serving my clients and family and friends.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for answering that. I'm taking the other card. What would your younger self not believe about your life today? Hmm. Um, I think there's one or two obvious answers to that, but I'm gonna go on the fact we're in the back to school season and the start of fall sports right now. Um, I don't think my younger self would believe the job I'm doing at being a dad, because I still catch myself um, surprised. I get done when I get done, being a dad, and
got a
managing everything that there is.
you have a very full plate with two very active young boys, and that's a good thing too.
Yeah,
It keeps you busy,
yeah, yeah,
but it's a lot.
yeah.
And we're proud of you, by the way.
No, thank you. And if I was going a lighter answer, I'd probably say the running. You know, like that's I would have never. My younger self made fun of runners. I didn't do sports if it involved more than about 6 seconds of running. Um, and I just ran in a race this last weekend in Chicago, a 10K. I ran in a race the week before that, and I'm doing my third consecutive race this coming Saturday. So that was my
Wow,
fall training was
that's great.
3 races in 3 weeks. The month of August, I ran somewhere around 120 miles in training.
Wow,
I set a goal at the beginning of the year to run uh, 750 miles or 800. And I was 850 miles, and I'm just at 800 right now. So it looks like I'm gonna be able to get my goal for the year if I just
that's
keep smart and keep
yeah.
good. And my younger self would nowhere believe, like, dude, you're what?
You're channeling your Uncle Tommy.
I I
Yeah.
found that out early. Like,
Yes,
I mean, I
he
always
was
knew
a
he was a
runner.
cross country
Yeah,
runner, but
yeah,
I started to find out like he just actually did a lot more than just ran cross country. He
right.
he loved that
Absolutely.
activity and some of the genetics or some of the aspects of running and being a successful runner can be passed down genetically. So that was
Could be.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So, well, so there we go. We're not really strangers, making a little connection, but now let's get into the episode. And really, today's episode is, when I was writing my notes and kind of putting it together, I was like, will you understand why it's important? And it's a play on words and having a will, and having documents ready for yourself. And I think the most important thing to understand, like for Leslie and I, we felt bad we didn't have something started before we got started. And I just don't think we knew any better. We didn't know the time it was going to take. We didn't necessarily know how to come about and talk to Hal about that, or if even Hal was the right person to talk about that. Um, but I think it was around 2020, just before the company sold. We had moved here. I knew we were living here, and I think it was a cause of a tragedy through one of our friends losing their spouse unexpectedly. And that made us think we are really underprepared for what we need to be ready for. So that was really kind of the goal today was, before life changes, most likely for the worse, at least in this case, before life changes for the worse or for the unexpected, what should you do what should you do before life changes and what things do you need to do after your life changes? Why these discussions and decisions can strengthen your marriage, your family's plan for the days are inevitably going to face. And I think that can be talked about with losing a spouse, losing a child, losing a parent. And I think any of those at any age can be life altering.
Absolutely.
And what that means for your family, what that means for tax responsibilities. I mean, there's so many layers that we can get into it today. So that's what I want to try to jump into. And if anything, what I mean at the high surface is if you are someone that's listening or watching this podcast today and with your spouse, you haven't talked about some of these things, talk about them. Use this podcast as an example. As I heard this on the podcast, I've been listening to. Can you remind me what our plan is for this or what you think we can do or who do you think we should talk to? You don't have to take it to the Google route. There's close family, loved ones around you that you can ask. So we'll get into a lot of that today. We'll talk a little bit about my experiences and what led to this, how you also have, which is another reason I wanted you to be here today, not only professionally, you have a story of planning for the family and maybe not having some plans for the family and dealing with all kinds of twists and turns along the way. So um I think a little bit about let's get into a little bit of details of what I hope people can get away from this, and then we'll wrap up the episode a little bit, kind of your story and your experiences that we don't touch along the way.
Sure.
So what if someone doesn't have much of anything planned right now. They're about to get married. Maybe they're not even married. They just don't have anything for what they own. Why should someone get a will? Why should someone get a power of attorney?
So in order to answer that, I'm going to go back to one reason why I think people don't do these things. There are a couple of reasons. I think oftentimes it's really hard to envision your mortality. We're all busy doing stuff, and we're not thinking about necessarily dying, quite frankly, or don't want to. And so we put those things off. And then secondly, people are busy, and so they have more pressing matters. So I think those are two often reasons why people don't embrace it sooner. Um, but what you really want, the reason you want to address it is you don't want to leave a mess for your family.
Yeah.
And not planning, you are potentially leaving a big mess. And instead of you being in charge of what happens to your things and your children, perhaps, or whatever,
Mhm.
that may be up to the state or a series of laws that are already in place as default rules about what happens. Now, those rules are helpful to be there because they are a default, but they're not the same as you making those decisions or
Mm.
you and your spouse making those decisions. And so for that main group of reasons, it's really important that people do pause and say, okay, where are we? Do we need to find some help here? And you know what? It's actually okay to Google it. I
Mhm.
would I wouldn't rely on Google, but it's a good way to start
Yeah.
if that's all, if that's where you are. I think people just need to not be so intimidated by it and just say wherever you can enter this conversation, do enter it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's just play out one scenario to my circumstance because we can then talk to that. So Leslie and I got started. We had a couple kids. We owned a house and a couple cars. So we had a will that talked about I think kind of like the other had control of all of the possessions if one passed. And that's kind of your basic coverage of things. Um, uh, what other things should people be looking for? Like what kind of stuff is covered in a will, for
Sure.
a new family, a starter family that hasn't, they're not really sure where to.
Yeah. So what I usually do is I advise actually my clients and friends when their kids turn 18, or if you turn 18, you need at the very least need to have health care and property powers of attorney. Because all of a sudden at 18, you are in charge of making your own decisions. And if you can't make them for some reason, because temporarily or permanently you're incapacitated, you're injured, ill, whatever, and you need people to help you, you don't have a power of attorney, there is nobody who's empowered to help you. And so then it comes up to, again, these state laws and the courts or
Mhm.
whatever. So at the very least, I think everyone should, 18 and forward, have powers of attorney. When you take that next step and you start accumulating things, or you get married, and particularly when you have kids, having a simple estate plan is important because one, you help set forth the rules of where you want things to go. And the will you're talking about in our little industry, we call the I love you will.
Mhm.
I leave everything to each other and then the kids,
Yeah.
right? And that's the simple and very natural place to start with an estate
Mhm.
plan. Sometimes it's as simple as owning things together, owning things jointly, and naming each other as beneficiaries on 401k plans or 403b plans or in life insurance or whatever, and then naming the kids. And so those are some basic things people can do as they're moving along. And then over time, and naming guardians for children. So
Mhm.
if you're not around, who's going to take care of the kids, and what resources are they going to have to take care of the kids?
Yeah.
So those are all things that can start to be addressed. So oftentimes, and actually, so I'll go back a step and say there are about 4 or 5 goals of estate planning that I focus on when people come in, and I call this my estate planning 101.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so
everyone get out a pen and a piece of paper because I think there's going to be about 5 points you can jot down here if you haven't already.
I think this is good. One is setting forth a plan of distribution. Who gets your stuff?
Mhm.
Number two, avoiding or minimizing probate. Probate is the court involvement in the administration of your estate. And I can get into more detail about that later if necessary.
But
Three,
probate's a bad,
well,
not a bad thing, but it adds extra level of headache to a lot of scenarios that may not need.
it can. So it's probate is a process that the state has in place to make sure that your debts get paid and then your assets get somewhere.
Mhm.
So this is part of these default rules I mentioned earlier. If you don't make the decision, the state will make the decision for you
Right.
through these laws. It's good there's a process that you can default to, and there's some benefits actually to probate that if you're worried about what's called a will contest, that is, if there's some family strife perhaps,
Hmm.
or maybe some creditors who might have some claims, and those need to get sorted out, the probate process will permit that to be done in a legal and efficient way, so that you can get resolution. So it's not altogether a bad thing. However, it may be unnecessary, and so we oftentimes, as our second item, to the extent we can avoid or minimize probate where we don't need it, we do.
Yeah,
We do. And that gets to kind of how you own your assets and a variety of other things. But avoiding probate or minimizing it is helpful.
is a goal. Okay.
That's number two. Number three is avoiding or minimizing federal and or state estate taxes. So it varies state to state, but in Illinois, for example, we have both the federal estate tax and a state estate tax. The good news is the exemptions are really high, so lots of people are exempted from that. So right now it's almost 14 million per person at the federal level. Next year it's going to go to 15 million per person. So that's a lot. In Illinois it's 4 million the exemption. So you can pass that much along to the next generation without paying any estate tax. So most people are covered, but not everybody's covered. And that counts life insurance and farms and whatever else you may businesses, and you may not even understand how much paper wealth you have that all of a sudden could trip one of these, particularly the
Hmm.
Illinois exemption. So that's number three. In many other states, they don't have estate taxes. So that there, for example, in Missouri, there's not an estate tax, and so that's a more favorable. Or in Florida or several other states, they don't have them. So sometimes picking where you live makes a difference too.
Yeah. So going back to that one, um, so like in Illinois, for example, for our Illinois listeners, is the is having there's a plan you can do to, like in our case scenario, when the spouse dies, you can kind of roll that exemption with the other.
So at the federal level, you do have what's called portability. That's the legal term.
Okay, so it's on
Kinda
the federal level, not
yeah.
necessarily the state level.
But at
Okay.
the state level, though, there are ways to plan to make sure that you get to use both exemptions. So that's why you do a plan, because if you don't, you may miss one of those
And
exemptions.
is that getting your team, not necessarily we have to go into that example here, is another person someone might want to have in that conversation with their attorney is also maybe a CPA?
CPA and an investment advisor is a good
Okay.
one. Somebody who knows that part of your assets.
So
So
those are kind of
the
those are
team,
that's the team. Anyone starting to plan their next step is going to want to have, other than their attorney, as a CPA, and if they have a financial advisor that's helping them with
exactly,
that retirement kind of wealth, or that's the team you can trust to help line out some details. Gotcha. Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
So that was number
Yeah.
three.
What's four?
Okay, four is the guardianship of any minor children.
Hmm.
So if you and your spouse are gone, who takes care of the kids?
Yep.
And so you get to name that person. Otherwise, the court's going to do it for you.
Yep.
Okay,
Which is why we updated mine after Leslie passed away.
correct. That's
Yep.
right. So, and that's to jump ahead. I'll say that's an example there of you need to revisit your plan
Hmm.
when you have life changes.
And we have that in.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. We have that topic of
So
talking like
okay,
good times to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll touch on that then. So the number
Five.
five is asset protection. So there may be ways in which you can own your assets that help protect them from creditors or other people. This is a topic I'm more concerned about when people are in professions that maybe they're likely to get sued. For example, doctors.
Okay.
Or somebody who has a construction company, and so if you want to protect your assets in special ways, there's some things we might do. For us normal mortals, asset protection may be just having good homeowners liability insurance. And so that's something people don't think about. They get the cheapest insurance they can get just to have it. But the truth is, you need to make sure and look at that liability coverage and make sure that if something happens, you're in an accident and you caused it, or you get sued, that you can protect your family's assets by having good insurance. So that may be an example of how most people, all people, should be concerned about asset protection. And sort of a last one is a hodgepodge of things. It's number six really, I guess, would be okay. Make sure you do have your healthcare power of attorney, your property power of attorney in place. So these are documents that you name an agent to make decisions for you during your lifetime if you can't make them for yourself, because
Yeah.
again, you're temporarily or permanently ill.
And that was I'm glad you said that as kind of a number six. I was going to say what I didn't hear in that was one I remember played very vital in my situation. Was um, healthcare, the health power.
Right.
Because Leslie um, was put in medically induced coma, and at that point there forward, I was the one.
You're the agent. You were the one to
Yeah,
make the decisions.
yeah, I had the one to make the decisions. And without that paperwork being in place, I don't know what plays. I mean, every state's probably different,
It
but it probably then comes up to the doctor's recommendations along with the suggestion of the family members. Maybe I don't.
Correct. So every state is different. So you're right on both that point, your next point. And in some states, there's a determination that has to be made. They defer to the spouse oftentimes, but it's not universally so.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's up to the providers, the healthcare providers, to make the decision, but they need to at least consult with the family. Other times, the family and the spouse, for example, would have the absolute say. So it
Mhm.
does vary state to state. So if you want to make sure that it's your spouse or it's if you're older, your kid or whoever is making that decision for you. If you can't make it,
Mhm.
you need to make sure and specify that.
Yeah.
And that's where having those powers of attorney is really helpful.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember some of the other instances where that paperwork in place. I don't know. I'm sure there were ways around it with time and other proofs. This was just seemed to be the hassle free. But I remember working like with Leslie's Banks,
Hmm.
closing some accounts for credit cards, things of that nature. Like there were some of those I had to provide, like power of attorney and possession. Like there was some documents that I remember we had drafted
Yeah.
with you.
So prior to her passing, it would have been the power of attorney
Yeah.
to do those things. After her passing, it would have been either the letters of administration for a probate
Hmm.
proceeding, if you have to do that. If you don't, your role as a successor trustee to her trust, or there are also things called, and it varies state to state again, but small estate affidavits. That's where there are certain assets that fall below a probate threshold that you can get transferred with a simpler process.
Hmm.
So again, this is why you want to make sure you have some professionals in your life who can
Right.
help guide you on these details. Um,
And I didn't have a copy. I mean, I there is somewhere. I remember when all this happened. I don't know. This is just maybe it's not silly. Maybe it is. I think people get worried about. Oh man, where am I going to keep this in case I ever need to come up with it? There, your attorney's office will have it. Don't worry. I think any good attorney's office is going to keep that document there safe for you. So when it comes up, and I think there was a couple times I even reached out to you, how I was like,
that's right.
I need to get this to the state of Florida or to Will at Hanson Spear
That's right.
to get certain things done, and it was a matter of seconds for you guys to be on it and to have that. So it is good to have those documents and to know where they are in case you need to refer to them. But I think it's more to have those documents available so when you and your spouse want to revisit them, when you have a child that turns 18 or something changes and you just need to look at that document and update it for whatever it's worth, that's why you need the copy of it. And still then you can
Right.
request it from your attorney.
Yes,
So
exactly.
don't don't freak out too bad about where you're going to keep it. It's you got options.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it was working with the hospital. It was working with banks and creditors where those power of attorney forms came in. I would also believe in litigation if it leads to whatever the cause is of any kind of litigation or life insurance. Those awards, those results from litigation are going to follow those wills and those laws of
Yeah.
power
Well,
of attorney documents. Is
um,
that correct?
well, yes. If there's litigation associated with someone's passing, like a medical malpractice suit,
Hmm.
then again, it depends on the state.
Right.
But that's essentially an asset of the estate, and so that's going to then the person in charge of the estate is going to be the one who makes the decisions about that, and that's also where if there are proceeds from the results of that, whether it's a judgment or a settlement,
Hmm.
where those proceeds would flow. And so again, having people that you would like to be in charge of that process named by you is another reason to make sure that you have set forth and updated your estate plan.
So let's take a second to talk about from my experience, and I didn't take it this far because I don't think I necessarily needed to, but tech companies, digital platforms, social media sites, I almost like to describe it operate at their own level or have another level of safeguard
They do. Yeah.
to their users' data. And I think whether you agree with it or not, I think I understand conceptually what these companies try to do and to protect from fraud and identity theft and so many things. But if you don't go in, and I'll use Apple, in fact, I did it 2 days ago with my mom. I saw a setting that was another l- data layer protection.
Hmm.
And when Leslie passed away, you know, a lot of things I either put on my mom or my brother, or, one of my siblings to be that person. And on Apple, I think you have to go into your account, go into sign in and privacy. And then from there, it's legacy contact. If you don't have a legacy contact selected with Apple to get your loved one's iCloud backup, this doesn't include getting into their device. It's just the backup, like to
Yes.
their data on the cloud, their pictures, their contacts, their note apps, the information they decided to upload to the cloud. If they don't have a legacy contact, it then turns into, I think, litigation is what I've heard in some cases, that people want to get into it, they can't. There's attorneys that get involved, and there's requests to, Apple or whatever social media, and that just becomes more time, more headache, more cost. Not saying that's why we have attorneys to help with those processes, and there's power of attorney documents and wills that, I'm sure Apple and Meta and those other companies, you can go through the process. It just takes longer. It's a bigger headache. It's something you don't want to have to deal with. Like you said at the very beginning, the more you can be prepared before it happens, the less headache you're going to put your loved ones
Right.
through.
Because the time someone passes away, you're already dealing with the trauma of that, and obviously in Leslie's situation, it was a great trauma. But for anyone who passes away, you're never quite ready for it.
Yeah.
Even if it's an old age, and so that's not when you want to have to worry about those things. I had a daughter of a client who died at a very ripe old age, and I sat down to go through the various things that need to be done. And, she was kind of an old hippie type. And,
Hmm.
she looked at me and said, "Al, I'm glad you're here to take care of this scary, boring stuff because somebody has to take
Yeah.
care of it, and it's important, but
Hmm.
it's kind of scary and boring."
Yeah.
So actually, in preparation for this conversation, I learned a little bit more about what you're talking about,
Yeah.
because we now, for the most part, as a standard part of our wills or trusts or powers of attorney, we insert something about digital assets and what happens to digital assets and who's in charge of those. So I can tell you in theory, the people that have those provisions are covered, but getting Apple or getting whoever to honor what that says, that's probably still a process. That's
Yeah.
probably still something to go through. And so that's where seeking out what you described as Apple legacy contact. I mean, doing that, that's going to be more important to Apple, quite frankly, than whether I can produce a document that says this, because they'll still want you to jump through that hoop.
And I had a friend that I met in the last couple years who lives out east, and if I remember her story right, her husband passed away, didn't have the legacy contact, and it took like 6 to 8 months
Boy,
of providing the documents and sending them in, and then waiting for their team to review it and approve it or deny it with appeal. I mean, like all of these, it's not even in a court. It's just dealing, like, this is their language of meta.
their corporate process,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
their corporate process and things along that. And you know, the I lucked out. Like I these one of the things that we weren't prepared for because we didn't know how to be prepared for it. And Leslie and I didn't necessarily like share all the times our phones updated and we had to update passwords and get into that. Um,
Passwords, though, that's
Leslie's phone or had recently gone through a password update, like the lock screen.
okay, right.
I didn't know it. The boys always used our phones. Like Sterling always used my phone for games when we were at restaurants. Cameron always used his mom's phone. And like I'm sitting there, it's like if I use it 10 times the wrong password, it's gonna
Lock you out,
lock me out forever,
right.
or 50, whatever it is. And I'm just looking at there, and I remember kind of crying one night, and I just look at the boys like, "Do any of you guys know mom's password?" And Cameron comes over and grabs it and unlocks it.
Wow. That's
And I go to settings, go to the permissions, sign in security, because I knew her lock screen. Then I set myself up as the legacy contact.
right. Well,
And
that's
and that's,
you got lucky.
yeah, I mean, got like, and that's, listen, these are, I know every couple is going to be different and every couple is going to want to have their own assets. So if you don't even want to give your loved one, you know, have a little post-it note of your most precious passwords, um, have them on your note app. So at least when the legacy contact comes through, they can see your notes app and then unlock your device and have access to all the pictures you maybe never uploaded to your Apple Cloud, because the device, and then the data you're storing to the iCloud is a completely different piece to it. So it's a headache that's out there. It's miserable. It sucks that people have to go through it.
So there are apps like the one I use is called LastPass,
Mhm.
and it's a way you can digitally store your passwords, and then in turn it has a super password on it. And so it's a way then I could put that super password aside somewhere safe, and Kathy, my wife, could have that. And so instead of giving her 30 passwords for
Yeah.
everything else I do, if I give her that one in the kind of, in
Uh-huh.
case of fire, break glass kind of a situation, then it's
Yeah.
there and she can access the last pass. Now, you got to be comfortable giving somebody the password somewhere, right?
Mhm.
Or else, give it to your lawyer if you're worried about that. I mean, so that your lawyer can stick it in a file somewhere in a safe. But it is important to have those, and I think that's something that even in my own family we could do a better job of.
Yeah, and I think, we did pretty good at knowing, like Leslie took care of some bills, I took care of the other bills, and we knew the passwords and logins for all of that, but there was just a couple things of, you know, I think at that point, because of the company we worked for and the safety measures, like every, 3 months, we were having to update
Sure.
our lock password and another password to get in our emails, and
Yep.
you just get to the point where you stop.
Oh, it's
Like,
mind numbing.
yeah, my
Number.
kid uses my phone here. Okay, use that. Yeah, fine. That's where it sits at. So, I did want to mention that part with, social media and sharing those passwords or knowing where those passwords are. I love that app. Last
Last pass.
Pass. Okay, so Last Pass. And there's probably a lot of different
There are
apps out
others.
there.
Yeah.
So, that's definitely one to look at. Um, how getting in, I think, a little bit more into your journey, your story of from some of your experiences to know why these are important, and then also just from your experiences why some of these are important. Um, you know, I know some of it, or at least I know the direction of it. I think I'd probably want to start first, with your dad. I got to work with your dad
Yes,
for
you did.
uh, the last years he was at the wig, and I got to speak to him every day, and I stopped in his office every day, grew up around him and all of the Santa love and Christmas. And
Yep.
I mean, so many times as a kid he sponsored our basketball teams, and things along those lines. Just I still have a pin, like a little shirt pin of him from one of his circulation deals that is up in my.
His promos and whatnot you
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
yeah. So can we start there with that part
Sure.
of the story, and tell me a little bit about your dad and everything thereafter.
Yeah. So, well, I miss my dad to this day, but I'm glad you had an opportunity to work with him, and he was a great colleague for people at the newspaper and the family. Just and your mom had worked with him, and
Yeah.
lots of others in the family. Of course, he spent his whole life, almost his whole life, with the newspaper. He'd worked some for WGM as well. So anyway, that was his life. So 19 years ago, almost to the day, my dad received his diagnosis of Alzheimer's.
Mhm.
And that started a 8.5 year journey of dealing with that between then and his death, which is a pretty long time actually for someone with Alzheimer's
Yeah.
to have. And I'd say about half of that he was socially, you know, engaged to a degree, to varying degrees. The latter part not. And so immediately when that happened, we were thrust into a position of having to make some changes in order to protect him and my mother and their things and just reorient his life. And dealing with there are lots of ways to lose people. Suddenly is awful. Over a long time is awful too.
Mhm.
They're different kinds of awful.
Yeah.
And in his case, it was the long goodbye. I think that's what Ronald Reagan called it,
Mhm.
who also had Alzheimer's. So that was super tough because the beginning of it was having to essentially insert myself into taking charge of things when maybe he's not quite ready for it, but he knows he needs it. And it was eh, challenging just simply to find things. I mean, it was literally rooting through drawers trying to find things because his Alzheimer's had already hit to the point that some things were ending up in the places they shouldn't be, and there were some problems starting to pop up. So having to decipher all that. The good news is my parents had a basic estate plan in place. The bad news is after a short time, he really didn't have the capacity to make any more changes, and so we were kind of stuck with what we had. Fortunately, he had done some good planning, and so the basics were in place. But that began then this 8.5 year odyssey of sort of dealing with having to draw back his decision making,
Mhm.
ability and fill the void there, and take care of him and my mother and my brother and just move on with life as best we could, while trying to provide him the best kind of life that he could have with what time was remaining. So that was so I was fortunate they had a plan. I wish we had had more time to work on some things to make them a little smoother.
Mhm.
In the end, it all worked out. So I guess that's an example. That's a good example of yes, they had a plan. That's great. It was an awful experience of the three most difficult things in my life. Maybe there are four now. That's right up there at the top of the list. So
So the question I have on my mind, and it's one we talked about, the right time to update and change your plans, as they come necessary. It So if someone gets a diagnosis like this and they already have a plan, does that diagnosis stop the ability to change it at that point?
not immediately necessarily. I mean, that is to make a change, you need to have capacity at the moment you're making the change. So if you understand what you're doing at that moment and can process that and can demonstrate that, and that might need to be memorialized by a doctor's visit. In fact, for our older clients, and for kids who are dealing their children who are adults dealing with their older parents, there's a tough moment where you see mom or dad needs more help and you're trying to empower them to be independent as much as they can be, but recognize they need more help. Some parents are better at accepting that than others.
Hmm.
And so that's a difficult dance to go through, but it's an important one. And so that's a time when you might need to encourage mom or dad to say, hey, maybe we should go visit your lawyer and talk about if everything's set up now in a good place. Do you have an update to your agents on your powers of attorney and your trustees and executors and all that so that we have this stuff covered when you need help? And we want you to be independent and do as much as you can. But when you do need help, we want to make sure that we're there or you have somebody there.
Hmm.
So I think that's an important part of what I took away from that lesson is being able to have those conversations with mom and dad or whoever is that older person in your life who relies on you for something, making sure you're helping them recognize when that is. Because unfortunately, when you get to that point, you may be in denial.
Hmm.
Okay. Again, you have this part about people don't like to confront mortality. So that's tough. So you might have to help them face that. But they don't necessarily lose capacity immediately. It's a question of having those moments where they do have capacity.
Hmm.
And so, for example, making a will. In order to make a will, you have to be 18 years or older. You have to be of sound mind. You have to actually, it has to be in writing, and you have to sign it yourself, and you have to have witnesses sign it, and having seen you sign it. These are things that if you all of a sudden lose that capacity or you lose the ability to sign your name, there are ways around that too. It gets more and more difficult to then execute on these kinds of planning techniques. That's why, again, it's important to revisit this.
Yeah. Um, so then let's go back. I can't imagine the feelings you had, taking yourselves back 19 years ago. Um, Now having to be put in the situation of kind of managing the family and helping make those decisions, but then it's also your dad,
Right.
you know.
Yep.
What what was that experience like?
Well, for me, the hardest part was I don't know, it was all awful.
Yeah.
But the first part of it, the hardest part was me seeing him know that he was failing and having him come to grips with that. I was pained by his pain.
Hmm.
And then there's all the business stuff we just talked about, and
Right.
that's unpleasant and difficult. and all that. But it was really the pain of seeing him lose what he knew as his normal life, slowly and sometimes in bigger steps. The latter part of it was hard. Wasn't so hard on him anymore because he, quite frankly, got to the point where he really didn't know what was going on. There'd be moments where he would recognize things, but he had stopped for the most part talking. He would recognize some people, like my brother in particular. Um, I remember the time actually that your grandfather and your uncle, so TA and Ralph,
Mhm.
visited him in the nursing home, and they hadn't seen him in a while, and that was a hard thing for them to do too. I know, but at that point he really wasn't talking. But if he reached out and touched you, that meant he knew who you
He knew
were,
he recognized,
and he
yeah.
did that to your grandfather. Um, so it was gratifying to see, but my point is, I guess that last part, for the most part, he didn't know those things, and so that was harder on the rest of us to go and pay the regular visits and
Mhm.
engage in conversation, knowing there's really not anything coming back.
Yeah.
And so again, that at the beginning of it, people, I'd say, another part of it is, I'd say a lot of people, it's they're uncomfortable with dealing with it, and so they just sort of ignore it, and so all of a sudden, maybe they're not invited to as many of the parties because people don't know quite how to interact with them. And
Mhm.
so they're social, and it becomes harder for him to interact with other people too. So it goes both ways. So their social world sort of, gets smaller. There are fewer people looking in after them. There's really no open mourning at that point because you're alive, right?
Mhm.
Even though you're deteriorating. At the end, finally, you're gone. And in his case, it was a great blessing because at that point, his quality of life was, non-existent. And it was painful for us, obviously, to go see him in
Mhm.
that state. But at that point, all of a sudden, 8.5 years of all that comes crashing together, and people are talking about how grateful, I mean, how we should be grateful that he's gone, and I'm still mourning the first part.
Yeah.
And so that was that all kind of came together at the end. And yes, it was a relief, and I'm glad he was relieved of that of this earthly life because it was a miserable one at that point for him. And it was hard. It was awful for us to see him in that case. But when you lose somebody, regardless of how you lose them, how quickly, how fast, I mean, it's still a traumatic thing, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, putting aside all the business stuff, then there was that moment it all kind of came crashing together, and it's like it's done.
So I kind of, if I heard you describe it right, because I never even thought of grief kind of in this way, but you were almost like on 2 or 3 grief journeys during that process because you are, just like you said, there's kind of the first part, and then as it's now getting to the end or has ended, there's grief of him actually being gone, but you really still haven't had the chance to process, uh,
First part.
yeah, the other form of grief, and dealing and coming to the realization with that. And do you, f- do you feel like at somewhere down the road, at any point down the road, did it kind of merge back in as one, or do you think there's still pieces of that kind of have their own little life and their own
Yeah.
little breath of grief? Like,
Well, it all came crashing together at the end, but the part that probably is still to me, rawest is the first part
hmm,
of having to do what I had to do and see, that being taken away from him.
yeah.
Um, so
And where were you at? I mean, for all of it, remember, guys, every and Hal said it as well, and I've said in a lot of other episodes where we never want to get into is like comparing what others went through. But when we share our stories, it's more just trying to understand the context of why that story is unique and why we need to understand all grief is different, all journeys are different, and why that's the purpose of this show. Because I mean, you're dealing with that as a dad. You're also fresh in becoming a dad at this
yeah,
time,
yeah. I, I,
right?
I have three. I have three young children at this point.
Yeah,
So at that point I had a child who was 2, another one who was then 3 or 4, and then one who was 6, let's say.
yeah,
And the oldest one is really the only one who really remembers him very well. The
hmm,
others remember his presence, but by the time they got old enough to
yeah,
really interact, he was, he lost his faculties. So yeah, I mean, I'm a dad. I'm a very active lawyer to the
Mm.
practice. Actually, at the same that the year my father then died, actually, I became chairman of my law firm. So I was very active leading up to that point and developing various other things for so I was active with the firm, active with my family, civic matters. I mean, all this other stuff's
Mhm.
going on in life too, and doing it at the same time, and having to just sort of, I couldn't pause at times, and that felt wrong a little bit too. I
Yeah.
mean, I did pause. I made time to make it happen. But yeah, I mean, this is a point. I was your age. I
Yeah.
mean, kind of roughly. You're a little bit older than that now than that, but I mean, it was a comparable point in your
Mhm.
life, and dealing with that, and having the kids, and so forth and so on. Fortunately, Kathy was with me and
Yeah.
on this journey, and very helpful. And we've both had to deal with aging parents and losing parents, and so we've been there for each other. And each story is different. You're right. Each experience is different. But it's something that most people have or will go through at
Yeah.
some level.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, I was just thinking about it was a topic I can't remember what episode it was in the first season. So getting just into that point, how much was work was obviously um an area that you could distract yourself from, in that grief, or put yourself into to help give yourself some break from the grief you're going through. Do you remember at any point from back in the last 19 years, was there anything you remember that was helpful for you in processing your grief or um, handling that or being on that journey or conversations or people, anything along those lines? Is that where maybe you started to fall more into faith, and going to church? Like what in the last 19 years has helped you
Hmm,
along your grief journey?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, there are healthy and unhealthy ways
Sure.
to address that, and
Hmm.
so I can't say I wasn't guilty at times of
Yeah.
choosing unhealthy ways to
Yeah.
manage that. Nothing grave,
Hmm.
but just maybe a little too many drinks, here and
Yeah.
there, and those kinds of things. But as far as the healthy things, I mean, I think at the time it was sort of like, why, you know, why why do this to my dad?
Hmm.
In the end, you recognize that life's got lots of twists and turns, and everybody's family has those things, and so it's not something specific to my father that he's being punished by any means.
Hmm.
So I mean, yes, every challenge helps you grow in your faith. Hopefully, it may mean a couple steps back and hopefully three forward, but you eventually will make some progress. I think if you pay attention and try. But as far as dealing with the grief, I think finding things that he had pleasure in, whether it was his love of the arts or his love of family, his love of Christmas
Yeah.
time, finding things that he had pleasure in and making sure to remind people of those things, the portions of his life that were gone for all practical purposes
Hmm.
for his new experiences are things that other people could see and remember and appreciate in new ways, and passing along some of those traditions. And some of it just silly little phrases that he used, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
He used to talk about the tickle monster with the kids. You were probably
I
a
remember.
victim of the tickle monster. So a few of the or lima beans. He loved lima beans,
Oh
and he
my
teased
gosh,
all
lima
of his
beans.
nieces
So,
and nephews, and then great nieces and great nephews like you
uh-huh,
about
yep.
eating
I
lima beans.
can't, so
And
many lima bean
and so
jokes.
trying to, relive some of some
Yeah.
of those things, I think so in that sense of dealing with grief, it's sort of like finding those good things, knowing that everyone's life is a mixed bag, right?
Yeah.
But finding those good things to help perpetuate so that, even though he's gone, or not everything about him is gone.
Yeah.
So I guess hope that's helpful. And yes, all that does ultimately feed into a certain amount of faith, but it's almost something I think I looked back on later and thought, you know what, actually, I'm better as a result of having gone through that, as
Yeah.
awful as it was.
Yeah. It's we all go through grief. We're all going to experience grief. And it's in those moments that we go through them and what it strengthens us and prepares us for in the future is the lesson I hope people can learn from it. It's sometimes hard. They get lost in the emotions or the whys, but eventually, I hope people can turn to, here's what I learned from this, and here's what I want to grow from it. And going back to what you said, uh, it was starting to get me a little choked up because there's so many things I do in this house that Leslie and I did, that the boys and I still do, that we picked up from your dad
Oh, really?
and from your parents and from Christmas. I
Oh,
mean,
that's
and
yeah.
really, I mean, and
We
that's
had our big Christmases, and those are
huge.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I fell in love with Christmas growing up as a kid because
yeah,
of your guys' house. Like,
yeah. It was a fun house.
every house had a Christmas, or every room had a tree in it, and
At
it
least
was,
one.
yeah, and it was themed, and so much Santa love. And
Yep.
um we have 6 trees I use in this house.
Okay.
Um
Watch out, they grow.
they do it, no, it does. And one, so I think the last, man, 10 Christmases, your mom's had a tree by the door, and when we come over for Christmas, take a decoration.
The giving tree. The
Yeah, the
giving tree.
giving tree, and you take a decoration, an ornament
Yep.
home for your tree. And we have had a tree since the boys were born, where was basically just created from those ornaments
Oh, that's fun.
that we always,
Mhm.
ones that the boys made at school, and the ones we got from Aunt Signy's
Neat.
and Tony's,
Yeah.
and that's what it
Cool.
was. And when Leslie passed away, we had a pretty good collection of ornaments that were of Leslie's.
Oh, cool.
And we still, to this day, the last couple Christmases, we've picked one we thought mom would like.
That's nice.
And the tree in our dining room that faces the street to our subdivision that we keep open for the entire month, it's Leslie's tree.
Oh, nice.
And it has angels on it and ornaments that she's picked. And um that tree isn't possible without the ornaments we got from the giving tree,
That's awesome.
and from the inspiration of just growing up and being our our first Christmas event growing up every year after my parents got divorced. Like, our first event getting back to Quincy was coming to your guys' house for Christmas.
A lot of good times.
Yeah.
And we have more to go.
Yeah, oh, a ton, and so
Yeah.
many. Oh, the next generation, it's gonna be so great. So I I love that's I just love all that you shared. So thank you very much. And that's a
You're
great,
welcome.
example of planning and honoring, and when life throws those turns. Unfortunately, not too long after Leslie passed, our family took another curveball, and it came in your guys' side, and with your brother,
Yep.
and his wife. Is there some you can share? What experiences did your family, you know, gain from that, and being prepared, or in grief? And so much of your family story, to interrupt a little bit, is just like having family to support. Your dad was so big on family, but
Absolutely.
so much in the last 20 years, I imagine you guys have had
There's,
to really lean on family.
there's been a lot of change. And that's another thing that you recognize going forward, that there's, as the cliche is, the only thing that's constant is change.
Hmm.
Anyway, yes. So sadly, just a few months after Leslie passed away, then my brother Peter's wife Judy passed away suddenly. Um, she had a recurrence of lymphoma, which she had beaten, but it had recurred, and she was so private, and she hadn't told anyone except for Peter. And then at the very end, her sister-in-law, and she just succumbed to a variety of complications of that suddenly one night. And so all of a sudden, my brother is, a widower, and life is turned upside down for him, and by extension, all of us. Peter's story is a little bit different in the sense that he got married later in life, and she was older than he. She had been a librarian for many, many years, decades, at 2 or 3 different schools, and had a master's and a doctorate in library science, and all this, and just a great career. But she was retired at this point. But also, and so they came to their married life later. I'm not sure I've ever known two people any more in love,
Yeah.
and I'm sure we can say that about a lot of people, but boy,
I mean, they were just
they
lovebirds.
really, yeah,
Yeah. I mean, they just,
totally.
storybook,
Oh yeah,
man. Yeah.
just so cool. So that was a big change. So as far as like the legal stuff, they had a prenuptial agreement when they got married because they each had, coming from different backgrounds already
Mhm.
with assets of their own and different prospects and whatnot. And so her family was wonderful to work with, but she had her plan, and Peter had his plan, and they were very gracious to let him to stay in the house that they had had together, which was their family's home. And then slowly we worked on moving Peter to Quincy from Palmyra, where they lived together. And so, that was a tough transition in lots of ways. Her family was very supportive, but there's a lot of stuff to go through,
Hmm.
and that had been her parents' house before that. So there are a lot of things there that needed to be addressed physically, and then just sort of being mindful of what's his, what's hers, what are theirs together, and helping be sensitive to Peter and his transition from what had been a 17 wonderful, happy. In fact, today it would be their anniversary today. It'd be their 19th anniversary. They were married for 17 years. So that was again there we were there, and we're grateful we were there. And Kathy was a huge part of this, by the way, and my mother too, and my kids, but Kathy in particular, in being there to support Peter through the process
Hmm.
of that death, of that initial grieving, and dealing with the things you have to deal with, moving him, and we're very fortunate that he's part of our life, even more than he was before. I'm so sorry that he's not with her, on a regular basis now in the same way, and yet we're grateful that he's part of our lives as well in an additional way than he was before. And so he lives just a couple blocks from us, and we
Hmm.
spend a couple nights a week together on a regular basis, and we do other things, and that's been a blessing, notwithstanding the loss. So as far as the planning stuff, I think in their case, for the most part, it was okay.
Hmm.
There were some details that needed to be figured out, but he had a very different situation where they had married later in life, prenuptial agreement, separate affairs, separate stuff, but then we had to sort of undo their household and their
Hmm.
lives together from the financial standpoint, and figure that out. Peter did. They were kind. I mean, Peter did make the decisions about things like the funeral with advice from her family, and where she'd be buried. She's buried in our Oakley plot, not far from Leslie. And so anyway, so all that stuff it worked out, but boy, it was sudden. And I'm glad, even though her planning had not been refreshened in a while. It worked. It was
Hmm.
okay, and it did. By the way, that is one of those life moments where then we sat down and said, Pete, we need to sit down and kind of go through your things and freshen things up and make sure that we have the right people named to do the right things for you. If you need help, if and when you need help, and so that was an opportunity to do that, and we did. So that again is those life changes where
Hmm.
it's a time to think about those things. Um, Anyway, as far as the grieving, part of it, I mean, we miss Judy and how much they loved each other and how good they were for each other. Our grieving now is really for Peter and helping him through those moments where, because it happens, and yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure it happens to you. All of a sudden, it's like it just hits
Just
you,
hit you.
whatever it is, and it just hits you, and you didn't mean for it to hit you, it just hit you. And so, that for Peter, that happens, and as it does anyone who's grieving loss. So, and that doesn't change. It may change in the way it happens, but it's always there, right?
Yeah.
It's part of you. It's not something you get beyond. It's always you take it with you. It's
Yeah.
with you. But anyway, so just being there for Peter, I think, is a big part of how we help him with his grieving. And he's a very social person, as you know.
Hmm.
He's very busy. He's in a choir. He belongs to the Elks Club. He's on the move.
Yeah.
And he's on the move doing things. He's got friends in Palmyra, and her family's still very good to invite him over, and we do things. So Peter's never static
Yeah.
by any means, except when the Cardinals are playing. He wants to be watching the Cardinals though. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm
That's the only
sorry.
that's the
I'm
only bad
sorry.
thing that Pete and
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
get along
yeah,
with.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, he doesn't hate the Cubs. He just doesn't like them the way he loves the Cardinals. So yeah.
oh man, well, that was, um, yeah, that was. I was heartbroken when that happened, Pete. That, um, that was just a really tough pill, as any of them are to swallow. But that one just, man, felt like our family took two really
Big hits.
huge gut
Yeah,
punches.
just months apart.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's just I just keep going back to family, and I try to think about how much my boys just unknowingly are there for me, and
Yeah,
I start to think, as they get to the age, of like Ben and all your kids, Abigail and Alan, the roles they'll play in supporting me then, and
Absolutely.
I can't imagine the countless times they just showed up in your life, whether it was um, in dealing with, Judy's passing and helping your brother or your dad's, um, the moments our family just, man, just without
Absolutely.
without thought picks us up and helps
Absolutely.
us out.
We're
So
very blessed to have a great extended family.
yeah. What other stories or experiences or you
Yeah.
know
Well,
you, you
I'll
have a mic, you have a stage. I mean, your brilliant mind can share more or stories to share. What?
Well, there's at least one, if not maybe a couple, just from my experience.
Mhm.
Probably the one that's next closest to me, but also as a professional one, is the loss of
Yeah.
my best friend and law partner, Brett Gorman.
Thank you for bringing that up.
10 years ago, and that was a different situation. He and I were contemporaries, we're law partners, together, and he was my best friend. And sadly, he had some complications from. Um, Tinnitus, which is an inner ear issue that, like ringing of the ear, that becomes something. It can become something under some circumstances called hyperacusis, which is a more severe uh, uh, illness, if you want to call it that. It causing a great accentuation of sound that just impacts you, like the slightest sound, opening or closing a door, could be monumentally painful for him. And I won't go through all the details of how it happened, but that it happened, and he had a successive number of weeks, months, really, where he wasn't sleeping and was becoming more just frazzled, and quite frankly lost his mind,
Mm.
and got to the point where unfortunately he took his own life. And so we collectively, we, the people around him, thought we were helping get him to a place where he could address this. But, and unfortunately, not in time. And so one Sunday, afternoon, all of a sudden, all this comes crashing down. And at a personal level, is devastating and something I, of course, think about every day, even still. Not so much that episode every day, but him and the good things about him. But our families are very close. Our wives are very close friends. Our kids know each other well. They grew up together, going through school and
Mhm.
church and all these kinds of things. So we were couples groups together and did things. I mean, we're just very close family. So all of a sudden, and my law partner too, who was a very pivotal person on whom we each leaned on each other for a lot in the law firm. So all of a sudden to lose, your best friend and law partner, I just become chairman of the firm that year, and the same year my dad passed away,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, I didn't have a choice. I couldn't not go to work the next day. I had to immediately jump into action because we had clients to address and judges to talk to and staff members to talk to and colleagues who were just learning about this and all having their own reactions to this very traumatic event. And so I didn't have the luxury of staying at home and just burying myself in my own sorrow. I had to jump into action. So, quite frankly, I think on the professional side, that may have helped me get through the initial part of it. But I can't imagine a longer week between the day he died and the
Mm.
day we buried him, and I didn't sleep and whatever else. And at the end of that week, it triggered what was turned out to be a several years long series of very intense dreams about him and about that loss. And so that, but then back to the lawyer part of it for a moment. Um, in addition to all that stuff and dealing with those things, his family needed some help handling their affairs, and they had an estate plan, but it's something that hadn't been revisited in recent times. And so there's some things we had to deal with to kind of figure out, and we did, and that's all good. But it certainly wasn't as easy as it might have been. So it's a reminder. It's great to have a plan. It's really important that you revisit that plan
Yeah.
to make sure things are updated. So we got to work through, and it was great. And his family's doing wonderfully now, and they're all special people living great lives. But that loss is something that we all have felt. And so, and then actually, just last year, his father, who was also a law partner and a close friend, passed away. He was 82, and that's But losing both those guys, it's tough because they were very close. I was very close to both of them. His father was a mentor, and referred to us and another good friend of ours as brothers of his, and we really were. So that's an example of where on the loss part of it, the grief part of it, losing a brother, and losing a brother with whom you worked closely. That's tough stuff.
Yeah.
And yet, in our case, life had to go on and things had to get done because people were depending upon us to take care of their matters, to take care of their livelihoods, to do whatever. And so, we just had to make it happen
Yeah.
and push through it. And we did. And it's and I, anyway, that was just on our end. Of course, the immediate family that was another layer of all that that's beyond anything that we could totally feel. But we were there to help them as much as we could as well. So anyway, I could ramble on about this because there's so many tangents of it, but it's something that I would say that's another one of those top three things, the hardest things I've dealt with in my life, and that's definitely one of the top three as well.
So looking back at those three things in the last 20 years, do you, I mean, how do how do I say this? I will sometimes catch myself and say, it almost started off with the card, like, I'm doing a pretty damn good job being a dad, you know?
Yes, you are.
Um, do you ever sit back and say, wow, I, I'm proud of what I was able to navigate through, or how did I navigate through that? Like, do you ever catch yourself like sitting back and kind of reflecting on your grief journey? I mean, being that you've kind of had some pretty significant grief journeys in the last 20 years, I've had losses before, but I'm sitting here just a few years in, and I still catch myself frequently like, I can't believe I'm going through this. Things to look back and be proud of how I handled it to help me carry through the next stage. Someone that's been going through that journey for a longer, what are there moments like that for you?
So I would say, so I've got a hard time when I think about these things, and this is just for me. I'm not judging how
Mhm.
anyone else uses language. When I think of the words like proud and pleased, I can never divorce them from what caused this to occur.
Mhm.
So my father's illness, my best friend's death, um, my sister-in-law's passing, and so I have a hard time attributing positive things, and yet I probably need to develop different vocabulary that makes me more comfortable. I am encouraged
Mhm.
that I was able to help navigate those situations
Yeah.
and help others navigate those situations. And so I take, you could say pride or pleasure. I have a hard time using those words because of I still have a negative connotation to what actually caused
Mhm.
it. But I feel encouraged that God gave me the skills. God meant for me to be someplace to do something to help.
Mhm.
And for Kathy and others in our lives who have been part of this whole thing as well, for all these people. And so that I'm encouraged that there's purpose.
Mhm.
Um, and I maybe would have preferred not to have that role, but we're called upon to have roles, and that's appears to be the
Mm.
role that are examples of the role that we've been called upon. I've been called upon to do. So I'm encouraged by that. Um, I regret that maybe I was called upon to do it
Yeah.
in the end, but I'm encouraged.
Yeah.
So that's the word I would use.
Do you feel sticking with encouraged then, do you feel encouraged the way you've seen your children and your family go through these moments with you as individuals, but then also as kind of cornerstones of yourself? Like, are you encouraged by the way you see others going through their own grief journeys and being open and forward, or
So
however that may be?
yeah, no, so I think for my immediate family, so I'll say my kids and Kathy in particular, I think it's made them better people
Mhm.
because they've been part of having to do that too. And as much as these things are hard, I think again it's life preparing you for things that'll be yet harder,
Yeah.
perhaps, for them. And so I'll use the example. We've had pets in our household for years. I grew up with pets. Losing a pet because they become part of your family.
Mhm.
Um, there's a loss, there's a grief there too. it's a little bit of preparation for losing something bigger,
Yeah.
I think, to a degree. And so I'd say for for the experiences that have been most intense to me, the people around me who've helped me do it, I'm encouraged that they are probably better prepared to deal with the things that then maybe as traumatic or more traumatic for them, my kids in
Yeah.
particular, going forward, because they'll have to. And so I
Hmm.
think that's, so they've grown.
Yeah.
And so that encourages me. And then I'm also encouraged that the people I see, such as my best friend's family, they're doing great.
Yeah.
And not that life isn't perfect, but I mean, I'm encouraged to see how they've grown
Yeah.
and figured it out
Yeah.
as best they can, or I should say, are figuring it out.
Right.
Right? It's never
Yeah. Yeah. There's never a finish line
there's
to
never a
it,
finish
and
line.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
we grow and we learn from it, and we're able to. Um, my mom and I have had a lot of conversations about um, every experience just is ultimately a way to prepare us for the next.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
that makes me scared as hell is what the boys are going to have to handle. Of going through what they did at a young age, but it's also going through something like that is going to prepare them. Um, if something like that happens, whether it's 5 years or 30 years or 40 years down the road of one of their friends losing a parent, that they'll be able to relate and be there with them, or the profession they're in will be able to help someone where they just feel passionate and falling and be able to deal with it. So, um,
Amen.
it's, yeah, yeah. So, we're going to start wrapping up. So, with that, is there anything on the professional side that we haven't talked about today or shared today that you think is important to get out and comment on, share about, give a tip, advice, anything along those lines that we haven't had a chance to touch on today?
I think we've touched on a lot of good stuff. So I think the key is remembering that at that moment of loss, whether it's at a ripe old age or way too young or somewhere in between, that's not when you want to have to be dealing with these decisions. So you need to, as much as you can, try to plan in advance. Do a good plan, put it on the shelf, and go on with life. And then, again, those moments in life where things change. You're changing a job, you get married, you get divorced, you have kids, you have grandkids, you retire. I mean, these are kind of the big moments. Those are times to revisit that plan, or at least every 5 years. I tell people. Um, and so I think if you do that, you don't have to live it every moment. It's not something you have to have in front of you all the time because it's, as that one client said, it's that scary, boring stuff.
Hmm.
But get it done, and get it done the way you want it done with the advice of proper advisors, and then move on with life, because actually you're helping make life a little more orderly to the extent we can put
Hmm.
create an order. We can at least make it a little less chaotic, right? By
Yeah.
by planning in advance and not leaving that mess. So I just encourage people to have those conversations, because you'll have enough to grieve over
Hmm.
wherever you are in life at that time of your loss. Don't put on top of that then the stress of dealing with all this other stuff because decisions weren't made.
Yeah.
So that's we've talked about that, but I just would
Yeah.
reinforce that.
So would there so then going to the personal side, is there anything about grieving in that nature on the non-professional side that we didn't get a chance to talk about today, or an experience or a story that you have that you feel like is a part of your story that you just want to share, or maybe that's important for people to hear who might be dealing with a recent diagnosis of their loved one with Alzheimer's, or maybe someone who just lost an in-law, kind of unexpectedly. Is there anything along those lines that we haven't shared today that you think is just, whether it's unique or a good thought to walk away from?
I think I've shared probably the most poignant parts of it, and I would say that it is something that I'm still dealing with too.
Yeah.
Right. And
Hmm.
and and so today's been a time to reflect on that. And on my drive back home, I'll reflect some more.
Yeah.
Probably. I think at times it's easy to sort of block those things out and get busy with life. And I'm definitely guilty of
Hmm.
that. I encourage people to take some time and take a long walk and do something that's not just distracting yourself, and to be open to hearing the voices, uh, and whether that's God's voice or just your memories or whatever it may be, sort of process all that. And I'm still working on it too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think. You say that well, because I am still very much throwing distractions at my grief, because there's just times I'm not ready to look at it.
Right.
I'm not ready to hear it. I'm not ready to see it. Um, Ran 100 and some miles in the past month to get the hell away from it, maybe. Who knows? But I think where our power lies, just like you said, it's when we realize that there's times that we can reflect and sit back, is where we are always putting ourselves in the opportunity to move forward
Yes.
and learn from it and be stronger from it and have more confidence in looking at our grief and addressing it and know what it's all about. And so I appreciate very much you taking some time to drive up here today and sit down with me today. I hope there was some great information here today for all of you to hear and to consume. I said at the beginning, but I'll say it again. These can be tough conversations to start, for the reason Hal said, for the reason Leslie and I did. It took a close friend of ours to pass away for us to have the uncomfortable conversation. Um, I hope my story is that reason for you. I hope there is something you heard here today that makes you want to have that conversation and put those plans in place, because there is enough shame and guilt and anxiety when we have to face our own grief and when those unexpected things happen. Having a plan is going to really mitigate and minimize those issues. So, with all of that said, thank you so much for joining us today. Great episode. We will be back. We'll be back season 2. We're doing every other week. So if you are waiting for live, fresh episodes, we will see you in 2 weeks. Otherwise, go back, look at our library. Plenty of other episodes. We have shorts. We also have social media channels. Come out there, provide some feedback, and share, like, subscribe. Thank you very much for being here today. Once again, Tom Van Ness, your host, your guide of Guide Through Grief, with my guest today, Hal Oakley. Hal, thank you very much for being here today.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope today's episode will help guide you forward. My goal for this podcast has always been to create a safe place for people who are navigating their grief journey to lean on one another and share their own experiences. I ask that you share, subscribe, like, and comment so we know how to best support you. Finally, we rely on listeners like you to help keep this journey going. Guide Through Grief is dependent on the support and contributions from you. Please consider supporting the show and our cause. Visit our social media pages or click the link in our description for more information. Thank you.